I want to give you guys my observation in regards to the tension between Putin and Prigozhin. When the war first began, anytime someone would say that Ukraine has a Nazi problem, there were always those who would pop up and say, well, by that very logic, Russia also has a Nazi problem because Russia has PMC Wagner, and PMC Wagner is commanded by Dmitry Utkin, who is a Russian neo-Nazi. Now, if you look at Utkin's photograph, look at his tattoos, it's quite obvious that this guy is a neo-Nazi. Plus, the guy doesn't look human. He looks like a maniacal, demon-possessed monster. I mean, the guy looks like a complete maniac. So people would argue and say, well, Russia really can't make the argument that Ukraine has a Nazi problem. Russia can't make that moral judgment because Russia has PMC Wagner, which is commanded by this maniac. But now the Russian government is against PMC Wagner, and PMC Wagner went against the Russian government. So this whole argument just falls apart. This argument that Russia also has a Nazi problem because of PMC Wagner, because they were against each other, and PMC Wagner literally wanted to do a coup against Putin's government. So this whole argument just falls apart. There is no comparison between Ukrainian nationalism and the presence of PMC Wagner in Russia. In Ukraine, the Ukrainian parliament made a law against criticism of the OUN. The OUN is the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which was the organization that collaborated with the Nazis and exterminated tens of thousands of Polish people and Jewish people. The leadership of the OUN, Stepan Bandera, Andrei Melnik, Roman Shukovich, these are heroes for much of Ukrainian society. Poland made a movie about the Volyn massacre, in which tens of thousands of Polish people were butchered by Ukraine's historic heroes. Ukraine banned the film. Zelensky gave an award to Miroslav Simčić, who was a Ukrainian nationalist, a member of the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, who literally annihilated an entire village. And this guy, Miroslav Simčić, is considered a hero in Ukraine. People will just disregard all of these facts by simply saying, oh, well, Russia has Wagner and Wagner's led by a Nazi, so you can't make these arguments that Ukraine has this Nazi problem. Well, guess what? Wagner has expressed its disagreement with the war. Prigozhin expressed his disagreement with the war and has stated that this war is a racket, that it's only there to help the oligarchs within Putin's circles. So you can't use PMC Wagner as an argument that Russia has this Nazi problem anymore, because PMC Wagner agrees with NATO. Prigozhin agrees with NATO. And there has been a lot of talk against PMC Wagner coming from the Russian government. For example, State Duma Deputy Andrei Gurolev said this recently, quote, "Today, no matter what fables are told, only a bullet in the forehead is the only salvation for Prigozhin and Utkin." Utkin is the Russian neo-Nazi who leads PMC Wagner. The Russian government is against Wagner. Now, Ukraine has this ultra-nationalist ideology that is embedded in the government. It's embedded in much of Ukrainian society. You can't take that and compare it to Russia having PMC Wagner. Now, the Russian government is against Wagner. So the whole argument just falls apart. Recently, there were raids that were done from Ukraine into Russia by pro-Ukraine Russian paramilitary fighters. And one of the paramilitary organizations that came from Ukraine to attack Russia was the Russian Volunteer Corps. Now, the Russian Volunteer Corps is a Russian neo-Nazi paramilitary organization that is against Putin. They entered Russia from Ukraine, and they fought against Russian forces and lost. Well, the Russian Volunteer Corps has described Prigozhin as a patriot of Russia. So these Russian neo-Nazis who are pro-Ukraine now have expressed support for Prigozhin, and Prigozhin has expressed his protest against Putin's war in Ukraine. So PMC Wagner, at this point, agrees with NATO, and these Nazis agree with Prigozhin and consider him to be a patriot. State Duma Deputy Andrei Gurolev has stated that Utkin needs to have a bullet in the head. So you can't really make this argument anymore. You can't make this argument that Russia also has a Nazi problem because of Wagner. This situation reminds me of Slavic Union. Slavic Union was a Russian neo-Nazi organization. And someone said, oh, Russia also has a Nazi problem because Russia has Slavic Union. And I looked into Slavic Union. It was banned by the Russian government years ago, and eventually it was dismantled. Slavic Union was founded as a neo-Nazi organization against Putin. So a lot of these Russian neo-Nazis actually hate Putin, and they hate the Russian government. They went into Rostov-on-Don, and they took over the military headquarters. So they were attempting to do a coup. Eventually, it was called off because I think Prigozhin realized that it was a losing battle for him. But nonetheless, Wagner went against the Russian government, and the Russian government went against Wagner. And Putin expressed his anger at Wagner. Now, where is the Ukrainian government expressing its rage against Ukraine's ultra-nationalist Banderite ideology? It's not there. Zelensky gave an award to a Ukrainian mass murderer who wiped out an entire Polish village. His name is Miroslav Simchich. And Zelensky gave him an award praising him as a hero for Ukraine. So this whole idea of taking Ukraine's ultra-nationalist ideology, saying that you can't say that Ukraine has a Nazi problem because of the presence of Utkin in Wagner, it really just falls apart. There is no comparison. And especially now, given the fact that the Russian government has gone against Wagner, and Wagner has gone against the Russian government, and Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner, agrees with NATO and all the people who are pro-NATO against the war in Ukraine. PMC Wagner does not prove that Russia has a Nazi problem. It just proves that Russia has hired really thugs to help fight its war, thugs that Russia should not be working with. Whereas in Ukraine, you have an ultra-nationalist ideology that is heavily catered to by the government, in which you have the state honoring Ukrainian mass murderers who collaborated with the Nazis. In Russia, you don't have that ideology.